Well, good evening and welcome to our study in the book of 2 Corinthians. It's a cold evening here in northeast Arkansas. I got about 7 inches of snow on the ground. My chickens right out the window. They're cold. But we're together. And my office is semi-warm, so that's good. And here we are. 2 Corinthians. So glad to have you along for the ride. I pray that you're enjoying this study. I certainly am. Let's just jump right in there and see what we got. How about that? Here's the review from last week. By the way, for those SBS students, here you go. There are your 6 questions that you can be looking at so that we can go ahead and take a picture of those so that we can be moving through those. But as we review what we saw last week, come down here to verses 16 and to the end so that we may preach the gospel in lands beyond you without boasting work already done. So Paul is hoping to go even beyond Corinth, and we're going to find out that he actually does that. He's going to have to be on a slave ship to do it, but he's going to actually go beyond them. He's going to actually get to Rome. Hi, Mom. Thanks for watching. Let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. Amen to that. You know, if you're going to take some pride in something, be prideful of the fact that you're a tool in the tool belt of the Father, a tool in the tool belt of your elder brother Jesus. You know what I'm saying? For it is not the one who commends himself who is approved, but the one whom the Lord commends. And of course, last time, as I was talking about that particular verse, I mentioned the whole idea of some of the trends that we have, even in some of our Christian schools today, where it seems like they are more concerned about worldly accreditation and accolades from the world than they are about actually studying the Bible. And I'm really concerned about some of our young men that are coming out of our Christian institutions, that they have more of a priority with making sure they get a degree so that the churches or institutions or whoever are going to recognize them rather than getting the information. And in that process, they may very well have to go into churches and situations where they call them on the carpet and they challenge them. The ministries, going to full-time ministry is the hardest work you'll ever do. But if you've got the commendation of God rather than men, you can survive it. You can go there and you can and overcome. But if all you're looking for is the commendation of men, I know of one situation right now where I'm told that the fella is just holding on to his job, willing to compromise, willing to, whatever, suck it up and just eat whatever they put in front of him because he don't want to have to move his family down the road. That kind of a backbone doesn't get you very far in ministry. You got to be willing to pack up and move if necessary. You got to be willing to stand with the truth and make sure that the truth comes out. We have to be people who are seeking the commendation of God. Let the one who boasts in the Lord. I want to make sure that my job is because God gave it to me. And my commendation, it comes from God, not because I got some secular degree or I got even some religious degree from some college. I want to make sure that the knowledge is the bottom line as to why I'm in ministry and passing that knowledge on to other individuals. Well, that was last time. Let's go into our text. As we start in chapter 11, we're going to go all the way down through verse 15 this evening. I wish you would bear with me in a little foolishness. Do bear with me. And so he's going to go into some stuff. And as we push further into this chapter, he's going to talk about some of his qualifications as an apostle. This is one of those areas where he does a little belly aching about how the folks are not appreciating the fact that he has the authority, just like some of these, going to call them super apostles or false teachers who have come in among you. He said, listen, I was there at the beginning. Why don't you trust me? Well, he's going to, the next little bit he's going to talk in somewhat of a sarcastic tone, I believe. But the sarcasm here is that I need to be foolish for just a little bit. Okay. Hi, Scott. Hi, Cindy. Hi, Debbie. Appreciate all of you all. Probably under snow just like I am in all those various places. What do we got there? We got Scott in Oklahoma. We got Cindy and Debbie both in Louisiana. Thank you for joining me. But as we see this idea of bear with me in this little bit of foolishness, he's then going to introduce verse 2, for I feel a divine jealousy. And I guess maybe that's what he's saying, is that I'm going to be a little sentimental here, and it's going to sound a little cheesy, use modern terminology, that kind of a thing. But stay with me, because this is important to me. And what he's saying is, I have a divine jealousy. Now, when you first hear that, you just get your all like, ooh, Paul, you're an apostle, and you're actually going to put that in the Bible, etc. I did a study on jealousy as far as God is concerned. Obviously, jealousy can have its wrong side, but it's kind of like anger. Evidently, you can be jealous for the right reasons, or you can be angry for the right reasons. Okay, here the jealousness of God, and this is just a very, very partial list, but I just noticed all of these as I was studying and was kind of just bouncing through and reading. Look at the number of times, and again, like I say, I got to Ezekiel. There are many more where it seems that God, it doesn't seem, most of these, I guess the reason I chose these particular ones because they actually state it. All of the other ones, or many of the other ones that I saw, they implied it or whatever it may be. This actually, I believe all of these actually stated that God is a jealous God. So this idea of having a divine jealousy is, I guess, well, I don't guess it. It is. It is divine. It is of God. Whenever you have a particular love, appreciation, and even a little bit of a jealousy with regards to false teachers that are coming in among the folks who you have built up and brought to the Lord, and all of those kind of things is what the next context is going to show us here. He says that in verse 2 as he continues, this idea of the jealousy thing, I'm jealous for you, since I'm the one, I betrothed you to one husband to present you as a pure virgin to Christ. Now, you got to know a little bit about the historical background here. Of course, this is Paul writing it, and there's probably nobody who's more versed in Judaism among the New Testament writers and being able to actually communicate it than Paul himself, being a Pharisee in his earlier days and all of that. But as you go back to Deuteronomy chapter 22, and I encourage you to study that on your own. It's a very interesting read. But in Deuteronomy chapter 22, we are set up under the old law, Deuteronomy, duo, the second giving of the law. Well, in the second giving of the law, one of the things that's going to be emphasized here is this idea of marriage and the fidelity of marriage and the sanctity of the home, all of those kind of things. What takes place in Deuteronomy 22, just to summarize for you, is that a father under the Jewish system had the responsibility of making basically a promise at the betrothal. The betrothal was kind of like the engagement moment. And he is going to make a promise at the betrothal that he will guard his daughter so that at the marriage, in time to come, when it gets time for them to actually have the wedding, he will be able to present her as a pure virgin. And what takes place in Deuteronomy chapter 2 is a discussion about what happens if the man claims she's not a virgin. And what happens to him, what happens to her, what happens if they discover that that really isn't the case, that she isn't a virgin, et cetera, et cetera. I don't really need to get off onto that as much as to show you that this is somewhat the historical background of the words that Paul is using here to the church at Corinth. And he's saying, look, I am jealous because I'm the guy who betrothed you, and I betrothed you to one husband. That, of course, is Jesus Christ. So I'm the fella who, if you will, set up the engagement between you, the church of Corinth, and Jesus. I betrothed you to one husband. And in that process, according to the old Jewish law, the background is I made a promise that I would present you as a virgin to Christ. But he's going to say in the next statement, but I'm really concerned that what I'm actually doing is I'm presenting somebody who is not a virgin. Spiritually speaking, they have not kept themselves for the Lord as the bride who is supposed to be pure and holy, etc., and dedicated to her husband. Now, let's just watch in the next statement. We'll see how this plays out. So he says, I'm jealous because I promised I would present you as a virgin to Christ. But I'm afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning, your thoughts will be led astray from the sincere and pure devotion to Christ. Very, 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 very powerful passage when dealing with the false doctrine of once saved, always saved. Let's keep in mind, again, who we have here, okay? I'm going to take that off so you can just see it. He clearly is talking to the church at Corinth, saved people. And he's talking to them in the sense that he is saying that I betrothed you as saved people. I engaged you to Jesus. And I'm expected to make sure that you remain pure, that you remain a virgin. You remain. That whole idea of remaining lends itself to the implication that if I have to continue to try to keep you in a state of purity, virginity, then it is possible for you to lose that state. Do you see what I'm saying here? And then he goes on to say, I am afraid. So why would he be afraid if there was no possibility of them losing their salvation? But according to the damnable doctrines of Calvin, once you're saved, you're always saved. That's the fifth of the five pillars in the tulip, all right? The perseverance of the saints, that really translates into this idea of once saved, always saved. And it's a damnable doctrine that's not out of the Bible because clearly we can see in this and other passages that it is possible. Paul fears that they're going to lose their salvation, just like Eve. Even gives us a vivid illustration. Just like Eve was deceived by the cunning of the devil, I'm afraid for you that your thoughts, he says it, not me, will be led astray. What does that sound like? Somebody who walks away from the truth, walks away from their salvation. Another passage in Matthew 24 that very prophetic passage. False Christs, false prophets are going to arise before many signs and wonders, so to lead astray, same idea, this idea of leading astray, if possible, even the elect. As you come through the tulip of Calvin, total depravity, and then unconditional election is the U in tulip. Unconditional, in other words, you don't have anything to put into the process with regards to election. You just either are chosen by God or you're not chosen by God. And so before you ever were, God said, I like that Sonny Childs, he's going to heaven. But I don't like that Scott from Oklahoma, my buddy, and so we're just going to send him to hell. Well, thankfully, Scott and I understand that's not the way God works. God understands, Acts chapter 17, verses 26 and 27. God understands that when he created us with a free will. And we didn't lose that, by the way, just because Adam messed up back in the garden. We still got free will, and it's still up to you and I. Read Exodus chapter 18. I'm not guilty for my father's sins, and my father's not guilty for his father's sins. We are all responsible for our own because we have free will. And knowing that, then, he says that it is possible that even the elect could be led astray. Yes, Calvin's doctrine is a damnable doctrine because Calvin would suggest that we are unconditionally elected, meaning that you can't choose to be in it, you can't choose to be out of it. You're just like a pawn piece, a pawn on the chessboard of heaven that you just, God moves you when he wants to move you. And if he wants to send you to hell, he's going to send you to hell. And they use Romans chapter 8 and the whole pottery idea, being the potter, and they use that to prop up this false doctrine. I'd be happy to talk to you about that in the future. Text me if you want some more information about that. I've written on that particular subject. But all I want you to see here is I want you to see how it's playing out. I'm jealous because I'm afraid that I made a promise that I present you to the pure virgin to Christ, and yet you're messing things up, folks. I'm afraid that you're going to end up like Eve, and you're going to be deceived by the cunning of the devil, and you're going to be led astray. Is it possible to fall? Is it possible to lose your salvation? Yes. Is once saved, always saved, a damnable doctrine? Yes. And so those who are promoting it, and if you are watching and you're living by that kind of a false assurance, I beg of you to restudy Scripture. We are told throughout Scripture, we are told that we got to continue to walk in the light. 1 John chapter 1. That means that's not a step. That is an ongoing process of concentration that I, as an individual, will focus on growing. Think about it from this direction. If you're once saved, always saved, why in the world even give us the Bible, in which much of it says, stay faithful, stay strong? Jesus will say to the 7 churches of Asia, be a conqueror. Why even say that if it's already guaranteed? I've got nothing to put into it, according to Calvin. So why do I need information about how to stay faithful? If that's once saved, always saved. You see the damnable side of this? But continue on in our context and notice this. Let me take that off because I need you to see the rest. All right, so he's afraid that Eve, just like Eve, they're going to be deceived. For if someone comes and proclaims another Jesus than one we proclaim, or if you receive a different spirit from the one you received, or if you accept a different gospel from the one accepted, you put up with it readily enough. And so he's very critical. He said, why do you guys just open your arms and let people come in here and twist things, etc.? And specifically, they're twisting things that God, that Paul, through the inspiration of God, Paul had set up, and now they're turning it upside down. Verse 5. Indeed, I consider that I am not in the least inferior to these super apostles. These seem to be the folks. You see it in context. I'm not sure that these folks are this is actually referring to the true apostles at all. I think that in context, it becomes pretty clear that he's actually referring here to individuals who are calling themselves apostles, but are indeed false apostles. He calls them here super apostles. I think this is another use of sarcasm where he's saying, well, these super apostles, they come your way and they say that they're all that. But I want you to remember that I came to you with power, and I want you to remember that I was there in the beginning. That's the argument I think that he is making. To further this point of the super apostles, we're just going to, and you'll see this here in a moment as we go into the next slides. But as we come on down here to verses 9 and 10, it's going to say, for I am the least, forgive me, this is the one. We'll see that in just a second. For I am the least of the apostles, unworthy to be called an apostle because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God, I am what I am. And his grace toward me was not in vain. On the contrary, I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of which God is given me. Notice that Paul is going to say about the real apostles, he's going to say, I'm the least of the real apostles. But really, he doesn't say that either. I mean, he says that, but then he goes on to say, I myself am not worthy, given my past and what I did, but by the grace of God, I worked harder than all of them. And so he's only least in the sense that if all I got to put on the table is my qualifications, I'm least. But I don't. What I'm putting on the table is qualifications that God gives me, and those qualifications are that I am working in the Spirit to do even more than those apostles are doing. Then as you come on down to 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 13, and that's supposed to be 2 Corinthians, I'm pretty sure. It is. Baloney, I forgot that. That's supposed to be a 2, guys. 2 Corinthians 11. For such men are false apostles, deceitful workmen, disguising themselves apostles of Christ. You're going to see that in just a moment in the following context here. And so as the context plays out, I'm convinced he's not talking here about true apostles. He's not talking about Peter, James, John, all of those folks. He's talking about individuals who have come to mess things up. And he calls them rather sarcastically super apostles. And he said, no, he said, listen, I am not in the least inferior to those. Now, I might be inferior to the true apostles as far as being an apostle born out of due season, and I persecuted the church, all of those kind of things. But even then, I'm not sure he's really leveling himself lower because of what he says here about the idea of I worked harder in the grace of God. All right, then, now we will transition, and you're going to see this verse 13, for such a false prophet, that's the verse that I just gave you, okay? And so we're staying in the same context. But as you move to verse 7 then, or did I commit a sin in humbling myself so that you might be exalted because I preached God's gospel to you free of charge? I robbed other churches by accepting support from them in order to serve you. And when I was with you and was in need, I did not burden anyone, for the brothers who came from Macedonia supplied my need. Real important passage for folks who are in the ministry. And this one really ties to my heart as I reference this. I've often throughout the years been somewhat criticized because, I rely on the church in order to make this ministry go. And frankly, it's the only reason I can heat this little office that I'm standing in right now is because of folks like you who are watching. And I receive support so that I can do ministry. Clearly, my ministry is a little different than what Paul did because here I am doing it online. He didn't even have online back in the day. But I've done a lot of travel in the past, and maybe we'll do so in the future. And the point is not so much the medium as it is the message that's getting it there. And so I've had to receive support from the church, but I've been belittled. My family has often been kind of pushed aside as if, somehow ministry is not worthy because you have to, you depend upon the support of Christians and brethren. And it's unfortunate, it's ungodly, and it's faithless, especially when you consider what is happening here. He says, listen, let me just talk to you for a minute. Did I commit a sin when I humbled myself? It is humiliating at times to recognize that you only pay the electric bill because somebody out there thinks you're worthy and sends you money so that your ministry can. It can be humbling. I got to be honest with you. It is a massive step of faith to be in ministry, and yet I think it's the greatest calling. And I think that when we raise our children to go into that kind of calling, imagine the blessings that come from God because we go there. Both of my sons have been involved in ministry. My oldest son has been to Haiti a couple times, and I can remember his first flight to Haiti. And Cindy worried, and I worried, the plane going to stay in the air, all those kind of things. But I remember also, as we prayed together and thinking together, I remember thinking to myself, there is no safer place for Bryson to be than in ministry. Now, it hurts, and believe me, his ministry, just like mine, has been a roller coaster ride of emotions, and I'm sure the same thing is going to be true of my youngest son, Gabriel. He's a phenomenal preacher, and he plans to go on a mission trip just in a month or so, and so I'm sure he's going to go through the same thing. But there is nothing more validating, and may I say it this way, nothing more spiritually secure than being in ministry. Nothing. And when you are dependent upon others to keep you going, it can be humbling. But you know what? Being humbled by God is a wonderful opportunity for you to learn from God, to keep you humble so that you're not arrogant, so that you're not dependent upon your own skills, not dependent upon yourself in order to get the job done. Humility is a wonderful trait. It's good for God to keep us there. It's one of the best routes of life that you could possibly be in. I'm not sure why people don't celebrate it more. So he says, I preach the gospel to you free of charge. So when he comes to Corinth, and he doesn't charge them anything in the sense that he doesn't expect them to take care of his needs. And I'll tell you why, because the folks in Macedonia are doing that. Paul has had supporting congregations just like I have supporting congregations. I remember one time traveling into all the way to Pennsylvania to do some mission work and do some meetings and that kind of thing. And we pulled out of a little congregation that we spent most of the week at, preaching our heart out and doing all kinds of things. And if I remember, it was less than $20 that they put in our hand. They couldn't afford it, but they put $20 in our hand, and it helped pay for the gas home, but it certainly didn't cover all the gas going home. But that's part of ministry. That's the way it happens. And you know how I got home? I got home because I had others who are out there that support me and they fill in the gaps. You see what I'm saying? And Paul's saying the same thing here. He's saying, I have been supported. And he, again, using sarcasm, he said, I had to rob other churches in order to come work with you folks. Again, sarcasm. But the idea that I received my support, and the brothers who came from Macedonia, they supplied my needs so that I was able to focus on ministry and not be distracted by things that would take me away from that which is most important, and that is ministry. So let me just capsulize because I kind of take this passage a little personal. Let me capsulize by saying, if you're in ministry, God bless you. If you're a parent raising a child, why don't you think about asking your child to have enough faith to go into ministry? We need more young men in ministry. We need more young ladies who are willing to go into ministry. So that in that process, God will not only be blessed, the world will be blessed, but believe me, in the process of constantly staying in that humble state, you will be blessed. He goes on to say then, let me take that off so we don't miss any of it. He says, so when I was with you, the folks from Macedonia supply my need. I didn't have the map, but you remember Macedonia, where that is? Remember we talked, that's the that's north of Achaia, okay? So I refrained and will refrain from burdening you in any way. As the truth of Christ is in me, this boasting of mine will not be silenced in regards in the regions of Achaia. And why? Because I do not love you? No. God knows that I do. And what I'm doing, I will continue to do in order to undermine the claim of those who would like to claim that in their boasted mission, they work on the same terms as we do. Sorry for having a poor reading of that. And so he's working. Interesting phraseology. He says, I will continue to in order to undermine the claim. Paul is literally working to undermine the claim of some. That's what we do. 2 Corinthians chapter 10. We take captive thoughts. We can destroy strongholds of arguments and that kind of thing. That's what we do. And we undermine the enemy. I'm going to sneeze. Woo. Maybe I won't. But as I look out on the snow, I got the sneezers. But then you ever do that and you got to sneeze and you can't do it? Oh, anyhow, now they got you all distracted. What was I talking about? Okay. Yeah, go back here. So Paul's actually actively working to undermine the claim of these false teachers. And that's a good thing. We need to actively undermine the false ministries and the people who are out there doing things that harm the church. We need to actively undermine that because truth needs to stand. It has to stand. It's that which will save us. Boasted, he said, we like to claim that they're on the same terms as we are. They're not. And then he says, well, here's the description of these guys that he's talking about that he's trying to undermine. For such men are false apostles. That's why, I think I got it here. Let's see. Boom. Yeah, that's your passage we saw earlier, right? Indeed, I consider I'm not least of inferior to these super apostles. I think he's talking about the same folks here. These are false apostles. They're deceitful workmen. They disguise themselves as apostles of Christ. So Paul is actually working overtime to undermine these bad guys, these false apostles, these individuals who are coming in and preaching a gospel that is not of God. So I'm working on a book right now. I think I've mentioned this to you. I'm working on a book right now. It's going to be entitled Flipping Tables. And it's all out of John chapter 2 when Jesus goes in and he flips tables in the temple. And we're talking about civil disobedience. More so, we're talking about the confrontational Christ in this particular book. And one of the things I'm noticing as I study this is that Jesus was forever in confrontation. He was forever in debate. He was forever standing toe-to-toe to somebody. Well, here we got Paul, who is standing toe-to-toe with false teachers and actively working to undermine their false ministry. If you're going to be a restoration Christian, you're going to have to do it like Christ did and like the early church did it. And there's two examples, Paul and Jesus, of individuals who worked to undermine the false teachings of that day. You need to be that if you're going to be a faithful teacher. These weak-kneed, mealy-mouthed fellows who aren't willing to confront anything, They're not helping the church. False apostles. And then verse 14, and no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. He says that I'm working against these false apostles, etc., and they disguise themselves as apostles of Christ. But he said, you understand why. I mean, they're just doing what their father, the devil, would teach them to do, and that is, even Satan would disguise himself as an angel of light. I think one of the most detrimental qualities of Satan in your life is the fact that he often speaks 90% truth. I mean, you can go all the way back to the garden. Remember, we mentioned Eve in the same context. You go all the way back there. What he said to Eve was not totally false. And so when he speaks 90% truth, you just, well, yeah, this got to be. But it's that 10%. It's that last little bit that'll bite you in the tush. It's that which will knock you down. And when it's not pure truth, well, these are folks who are they're masquerading like apostle of Christ. Satan, who masquerades or disguises himself like an angel of light. Here's another passage you can cross-reference with that, Matthew 7. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. And we've seen pictures and stuff, of a wolf dressed up in a skin of a sheep or something of that nature. But that's the whole idea. And Paul will actually reference this kind of thing. I think it's in Acts chapter 20 when he's talking to the Ephesian elders. And he's going to say that you need to be careful because from within your own leadership, there's going to be wolves that are going to come in and they're going to destroy the church. So you need to be careful. The point being that Paul is up against these false apostles, the super apostles, as he called them in the previous context. And because of that, he is having to lay out his case again, like it seems like he has to do repeatedly with the Corinthian church. I think there's two reasons for that. Number one, the Corinthian church was very immature. And so they were constantly having to be reminded who the authority figure was. And number two, I think it's because you can see that the Corinthian church, we've got more information about them than most any other of the churches in the New Testament. And so naturally, we're going to have more to say about that particular. Did he have the same thing to say about the church of Galatia? He might have. Church at Ephesus, he might have. I don't know. Those books are not as lengthy. But you got two books, 1st and 2nd Corinthians on. And so we got a lot of input with regards to this very immature congregation. And he's telling them, be careful of these false apostles. And then lastly, I found this to be very, very interesting, how he concludes this. So it is no surprise his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. But their end will correspond to their deeds. There's a check and balance system that goes on here. And the equation is basically this. You do evil, you get evil. And you see that play out. 1 Corinthians 5:10, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may receive what is due for what he has done in the body. So we're all, we all will be judged. You also see it in Revelation 2:15. This is a little more intense. If anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. And these folks certainly would not have their name in the book of life because they're false apostles, they're false teachers, they're leading the church in a direction that God didn't want them to go. You don't want to be in that situation. I think that's the snowstorm. What does that mean when you come to the snowstorm? That means we're done, except for get your head out the way, Sonny Child, so the folks can see the questions again. There it is. That's what we covered this evening. I pray that it's been a blessing to you. It certainly was a blessing to me to study it out. But you'll be getting that. I believe it's on Friday. If you're a School of Biblical Studies student, you'll get your little email, and there's the questions that you can answer with regards to that. Send it back to us. We're just a little over the halfway point in our quarter together. So thankful for all of you who stick with me, and I love you, and I appreciate you. And I pray that you'll stay warm. Sonny Child saying, be there, Matthew 16:26.